Hi everyone, welcome back to Lonza's podcast on the latest science and trends in pharma manufacturing. Today we are tackling a topic that many people know all too well: acid reflux. Whether it's occasional heartburn after a heavy meal or a chronic burning sensation at night, acid reflux affects millions worldwide, sometimes progressing into the chronic condition known as gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD.
It's a common disease, actually. So GERD is experienced by roughly 20% of the adult general population. It's about 30% of the patients that experience GERD that would end up with erosions.
While available medication can help manage symptoms, the dosing frequency approved by regulators is, especially in severe cases, insufficient to help patients restore their quality of life. Today, we will learn about alternative treatment options that are on the horizon to help you and millions of sufferers offer some relief. Stay tuned for the next 20 minutes of A View On, brought to you by Lonza. I am joined today by Kjell Anderson, who, as CSO and founder of Cinclus Pharma, brings decades of expertise in gastroenterology. Thanks for joining our podcast. I'm really excited to have you here today with us.
Sure. Hi there. It's good to be here, and I'm looking forward to talk further with you.
Would you mind introducing us to the basic science of acid reflux?
Sure, and stop me if I'm being too long here. But it's a question of acid. Now, acid is being produced by the parietal cell in the stomach, and the stomach is actually constructed to withstand the very high acidity, the very low pHs that we have in the stomach. It's a pH about 1 and 2 most of the time. So the stomach can tolerate the acidity well. When we are talking about the esophagus and the stomach, we have a connection between them, and it's actually a sphincter, the lower esophageal sphincter, that should control that there is a one-way direction of what's coming down from the esophagus into the stomach. Nothing should leak up into the esophagus. But in some patients, actually, the vault is not fully functional. So that means that the gastric content now and then refluxes up into the esophagus. And there it causes symptoms like heartburn, like regurgitation, because the esophagus is not at all equipped to withstand the high acidity of the gastric content.
I have a few follow-up questions. You mentioned the term I'm not familiar with myself. Regurgitation, was it? What's that?
Regurgitation, it's the feeling of something coming up into the esophagus from the stomach. Then you have a flow up into the esophagus.
Like a pressure. I think I'm familiar with that feeling, actually.
Yeah, I suspect that you could be. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
That is what can happen during pregnancy. It's quite frequent, actually, that this
Okay.
is the case. Yeah.
Why does this happen, though?
This is a problem that is quite frequently found during pregnancy. And also if you eat heavy meals before bedtime, you shouldn't eat too late, and you shouldn't eat too heavy meals, etc. as well.
Yeah, it's been a rule in our household for years, it feels. No pizza after 5 p.m.
Well, I can, after 7 p.m. is not fine with me, but before that, it's okay.
And when this is a chronic condition, it's known as GERD, right? Which stands for gastroesophageal reflux disease. How common of a disease is GERD?
It's a common disease, actually. So GERD is experienced by roughly 20% of the adult general population.
Wow, that's millions of patients. And sometimes there's serious underlying physical ailment to the discomfort, where the esophagus is actually damaged, and these are known as erosions, right? How many patients develop erosions?
It's about 30% of the patients that experience GERD that would end up with erosions. The erosions are a result of the acidity, of course, the acid refluxing up into the esophagus. And they are graded into two different grades on the severity of the erosions. So we have a Los Angeles grading, LA grade A to D, where A and B are the more milder forms of the disease, and grade C and grade D that are moderate to severe erosions in the esophagus.
That sounds quite serious, especially if you mention severe. What are the current options for treating it, especially considering the fact that it's so widespread as a disease?
Yes, when you see a physician, the first thing to be mentioned by the physicians should be lifestyle modifications, like we touched on earlier about heavy meals late, etc., etc. Um, it's also talking about alcohol consumption, spicy food, etc. One common thing is to talk about raising the head side of the bed so that by pure gravity, acid should not be able to leak into the esophagus. What usually happens is that these type of lifestyle modification is not very efficient.
So, what medical interventions are available for patients suffering from these symptoms?
Surgery is one option, but it's always a risk for mortality. Even a successful surgical procedure didn't eliminate the need for using of pharmacological treatments. So it's not commonly performed today. Also, there are medical devices around today, but when we're talking about the mainstay for a patient suffering from reflux disease, it is proton pump inhibitors. There is no doubt about that. The proton pump inhibitors are successful in treatment of many of these patients. In most cases, they are very good in helping these type of patients, especially when it comes to patients with erosive GERD, grade A, grade D. They most of the time are very efficient. But when we are talking about grade C, grade D patients, the more moderate to severe, there in many cases, PPIs doesn't really give the help that these patients need. It's about 30% of the patients in grade C and up to 50% or more having grade D that are not helped by an 8-week course of a PPI.
But why is that?
So a problem with the PPIs is the duration of action. They have a plasma half-life that is actually too short to cover the 24-hour period after a once daily dose. And the PPIs are, in absolute majority of countries, it is only regulatory approved for once daily treatment. The duration of action also after such a treatment is not good enough for helping the patients with the more severe grades of reflux disease.
It's clear that acid reflux isn't just an occasional inconvenience. Many people develop chronic conditions that can cause significant damage in the esophagus if not properly managed. Existing treatments provide relief for some, but they often fall short for patients with more severe or persistent forms of the disease. Coming up, we'll hear more about emerging therapies that aim to fill this treatment gap, offering new hope and better outcomes for those who struggle with standard medication options. Let's turn our focus to Cinclus Pharma. So, Kjell, you've been part of the organization for nearly a decade and currently serve as its chief scientific officer. Can you give us an overview of the company's origins and how you started working with linaprazan derivatives as an effective therapy for GERD?
With pleasure, I'd like to do that. And I could first mention here that I have a history of working 30 years, plus 30 years actually, at AstraZeneca. So I was deeply involved in the development of the PPIs that AstraZeneca had developed, Losec and Nexium. We had linaprazan in a big phase 2 testings where we compared it with Nexium. And after 4 and 8 weeks treatment with both compounds, actually turned out that linaprazan was not superior to Nexium. It reached roughly the same type of healing grades after both compounds. We saw that on these doses that we used, linaprazan was not able to inhibit acid secretion for longer time than what the PPIs did. So we actually started then to develop prodrugs of linaprazan to prolong the duration of acid coverage. So that's actually where it started, because AstraZeneca decided, based on the phase 2 results with linaprazan, that they should terminate the project and not continue in developing acid inhibitors. We were thinking for a number of years, a number of us who were involved in the linaprazan project, on how could we actually continue this. And after some time, colleague of mine, the chemist who was the chemist behind the prodrugs, and myself, we took up a discussion with AstraZeneca if we could possibly get out the prodrugs from AstraZeneca. And after some time, this was actually what happened.
That sounds like a great opportunity to develop a product that, for one reason or another, didn't make it out of the lab. And one of the promising products derived from linaprazan that you and your colleague could take out of AstraZeneca was linaprazan glurate, right?
So 2014, we founded Cinclus Pharma. And then we started almost immediately then to perform all the animal testings that was needed in order to get the prodrug linaprazan glurate into humans. 2018, we had the results from our phase 1 study. It looked very promising. We had a very efficient acid inhibitor in our hand with a longer duration of action compared to linaprazan. So that was very, very nice results for us, and we looked forward to proceed with the further development of the compound.
So, linaprazan glurate, you mentioned that it works by inhibiting the acid production. If a patient would take this long term, is there a chance they could have issues digesting food, since the acid is needed for disrupting proteins, right? And for some enzymatic activity. It's just out of curiosity, this one.
Back in the days, this was actually how people thought about it. We tested, especially in animals, we tested lifelong treatment in rodents with very high doses, where we totally abolished acid secretion for their whole lifetime. And looking at how they developed compared to control animals that didn't receive any acid inhibition at all the developments that we saw in the control animals, we also saw in the animals receiving the huge doses of acid inhibitor then. So there were no effect on the body development, etc., etc. So no consequences when it comes to that, actually. And I think that acid was very much needed during the evolution, and that's why we have it. But in these days, what we have, at least in our part of the world, we live under almost sterile conditions. We have freezers, we have refrigerators, we have stove where we prepare all our food, etc., etc. So bacteria from what we ingest in food is nowadays very limited. So actually, for somebody growing up in our part of the world, acid is not needed as I see it, and when it comes to the development of the human being, so to say.
That's fascinating. Okay. So how does it work in the stomach itself? Does it interact with the stomach lining? Or could you describe the biochemistry briefly for us as well, please?
Well, I take that in short. I would love to have a long session here, but I'm not allowed to do that. So we mentioned earlier that the parietal cell is the cell that produces the acid. And in the parietal cell, we have a unique enzyme, a hydrogen potassium ATPase, or what we more popularly now call the proton pump. But the proton pump is the enzyme behind acid secretion. And with the PPIs that we mentioned before, The PPIs also act on the proton pump, and it binds irreversibly with a covalent binding to the proton pump and inhibits acid secretion. The problem with the PPI, we already mentioned that, is that proton pumps are continuously reaching the parietal cell membrane. And when we give a PPI, plasma half-life is, as I mentioned, some 60 to 90 minutes. So that means some 6 hours after a dose of PPIs, the newly formed proton pumps can indeed start to secrete as much acid as they want to, because there is no further PPI available in plasma.
Thank you for the deep dive into proton pumps, Kjell. How does your solution work, and why is it superior to these PPIs?
Well, first of all, linaprazan, it's a prodrug, so it has to get rid of the prodrugant, so to say, and the glutamate part of the molecule, and that is taken care of by esterases. Mostly this happens through passage through the intestinal membrane. The glutamate part is taken away from linaprazan. It can also happen in blood and in the liver. So then we have linaprazan in the circulation, and linaprazan is the active inhibitor when it comes to linaprazan glutamate. So linaprazan, it's a weak base, and it concentrates in acidic compartments. So it will concentrate very much in the parietal cell part of the stomach. Linaprazan inhibits the proton pump via a competitive reversible inhibition on another site compared to where the PPIs act. And it's reversible, it's competitive, which means that the efficacy is according to plasma concentration. So when you have a certain plasma concentration, you know that you can fully inhibit the acid production. So it's from a pharmacological standpoint, it's a very beautiful relationship between plasma concentration and pharmacodynamic, that is production of acid. That is not the case with the PPIs, but with linaprazan, it's how it works.
How would you administer linaprazan glurate? You mentioned it can be cleaved in the intestine, but also in the bloodstream. Is it a pill, capsule, or could this be an injection?
Well, so far we have only tried tablets, and a tablet formulation would, of course, be the absolutely most prescribed formulation for this type of drug. And by the way, we have recently developed a new tablet formulation. We have been through the phase 2 clinical testings. We have 4 different doses of linaprazan glurate, and we compared it to PPI, and we came up with very nice results. And actually, the phase 2 was just a dose-finding study for the phase 3 study, and we were indeed able to find a dose response with linaprazan glurate. Together with Lonza, we have developed a new, very nice formulation that should be tried in phase 3.
That's great to hear. When do you plan to start with the phase 3 trials?
We are fully busy with the planning of that now. We will probably start it around summer 2025. So we are very much looking forward to be on the start of the phase 3.
You mentioned it's a global phenomenon. 20% of the population have experienced this, if not are experiencing this as we speak. Are you able to target any concrete patient populations? I wonder whether you could also, for instance, as we discussed already at the beginning, target pregnant individuals.
Yeah, exactly. There is definitely a population there as well. But in clinical studies, it's very rare that you do anything in pregnant women, because you are to be very careful with new medications and how they would eventually have any effects on the fetus and the newborn. Of course, we have done the toxicology and looked at this in animals, and everything looks very good in animals. So we have no reason to suspect that there would be any sort of malformations or anything like that.
That all sounds super exciting. Looking ahead, where do you see linaprazan glurate in the next 5 years or so?
Well, let's start then with where I see us in 5 years with linaprazan glurate. That would be 29 if we count 5 years from today. And hopefully we would have regulatory approval at this time in 5 years. So we're looking very much forward to that. We are looking at other assets within the GI tract. That is something. But even before that, we are also looking at other indications with linaprazan glurate, because there are indeed several other opportunities with linaprazan glurate, with a potent acid inhibitor, that should be explored. Also, when it comes to H. pylori eradication, this could really be something that could be of benefit for this type of patients, because you could actually reduce the number of antibiotics, and thereby you could avoid the resistance problems with antibiotics. So that's another big possibility. So that's something that we are indeed looking forward to.
That sounds amazing. Well, I'll keep my fingers crossed for you.
So do I.
Thanks again, Kjell, for sharing your insights on linaprazan glurate and its unique mode of action. We heard how linaprazan glurate competitively and reversibly blocks the proton pump in parietal cells for a longer duration than standard PPIs, offering more consistent relief for patients with severe GERD. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I've certainly learned a lot about the research, development, and clinical considerations that go into creating an effective therapy for this widespread condition. That's all for this episode of A View On. Join us next time as we explore the concept of smart capsules, what they are, how they work, and why they could be the next big thing in drug delivery. If you cannot wait, head over to lonza.com/a-view-on and listen to our previous episodes, subscribe to never miss an episode, and access additional materials and interviewee info. Bye for now.